Nora Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nora Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast, and I am your host, Nora Muhammad, and I am excited to be back after a very long break. And in this episode 257, titled "Back from Loss," I'm going to explain, some of the events that have happened over the past 11 months. And so I appreciate your patience as I go through this and kind of recount these past few months that caused the microphone at Nora Speaks to go silent. But first, I want to thank those who have been a personal support to me during this time, those people who have supported me loudly, supported me quietly. And I especially want to thank the listeners for your loyal support and being with the podcast these past 256 episodes over the past 8 years. Can you believe that Nora Speaks launched in 2017? Sometimes that seems like yesterday, sometimes that seems so long ago. But many of you have been with me from the start, and I am just so thankful to you for that. And let's just get into 2025. I had the privilege and honor of being asked to run for political office. And many of you who listen know that I am the co-chair of my local Democratic Party. And so I was already serving in that role. But anyone who's ran for office, you know that running for office is a full-time commitment. If you're going to run for office, it is advisable that you pull your family to the side and you talk about what's going to be required of you, what's going to be required of them during that journey. And it's a lot required of the candidate. And so I was already the co-chair of the party, and then I was asked to be a candidate. Now, being the co-chair or operating in my capacity as co-chair, I am largely responsible, like a campaign manager, in fact, kind of setting up and coordinating, facilitating a lot of the campaign events that happen, communicating with the members of our local party, our county party, and just trying to keep everything organized and running smoothly. And so this addition of being the candidate, that was just going to be more because, like I said, when the person is running for office, it's a full-time commitment. It's anyone I think about sports, it's like a full court press, but you do it over a period of months, and so it's just a serious time, dedication, mental dedication, especially. I think about the privilege really that it is to run for office for service of people, and it's not it's for me, I should say, it's not for personal vanity. It's not as they say, for vain glory. It's really about the people who are the constituents that you would serve, the people who vote for you and the people who don't vote for you. So it's a real privilege and honor. And so to go and stand before these folks and introduce yourself and talk about what your goals are, talk about your backstory and all of that, it's a heavy burden. And so I knew that I would somehow have to kind of separate some of my responsibilities, delegate some things to some people. And so I was very fortunate to have some people who could step in to perform some of the duties that normally I would do as co-chair, campaign manager. And so then I had to provide on the job training for people who were really unexperienced politically. And so I had that. But I will say one of the things that I'm just so grateful for is that a team came out of nowhere and circled me, and they provided so much support. Um, and it was a great help mentally, but just spiritually, and morally, what that did for me was something that I'll talk about in future episodes. And so it was just incredible. So I had more support than I normally would have, although I was still kind of coordinating everything, putting things together in terms of the schedule, coordinating and communicating. But I had um, a team of people who were committed to take things off my hands, that I didn't even realize I was carrying all the time. I look up, they were to my right, to my left. And they were just amazing. And, I hope that some of them will be future guests on the podcast, so I can, publicly talk about them. And I'll talk about them, but even to show the audience as they give their testimony of who they are and what they do, the audience will see the caliber of people that encircled me and learn about the work that they do generally, in support of our community and for our people. And so, I do look forward to, the time I'm going to come back to the microphone in future episodes and really talk about the lessons that I extracted during that time working, with those incredible people. So unfortunately, I will, kind of, come back and circle this, or put a pin in it, as it were. I was not successful in my race for political office. I was not elected. I could use the word lost, but I think about how much I gained in relationships and experience, that the word lost doesn't quite seem fitting, um, just because of, I don't want to overstate it, but it just seemed like, something miraculous happened, or something kind of divine in terms of relationships that were built. And so I'm just very proud of the race that I ran, the team that I ran with, and those supporters who ran with me. But I'm going to get into that in a future episode. Just kind of giving the audience a overview of 2025, why this episode is titled Back from Loss, and just share information about what the audience can look forward to as we move forward with the podcast being back. So, as I said, I was not successful. But 2025, that election was not the only loss that I experienced. So on the podcast previously, I probably have spoken, at points about my grandmother and who she was to me, who she was to our family, and some of the lessons that I took from her. She raised me. She raised me in place of my mother, and so she was like a mother. And in describing her, I've often said, before I knew God, I knew her. Your mother, your parent, that one that raises you, is the foundation. They're the roots that are planted for you. They're the everything. And so several years ago, about 2 years ago, I think it is, that she was diagnosed with a progressive and an incurable illness. And that was, upsetting. And there is some significant changes that happened for her personally. But our family rallied around her. We rallied around her to support her and to, you know, do what we could to ensure that her life remained as routine as possible. And part of that was also assisting with her mobility, and just making sure she could engage in the activities that she's always loved. One of which is going on cruises, So we made sure she continued to vacation. For one of her birthdays, we bought her a scooter so she could, get around on the cruise ship on her own. And she invited me to come with her, and I was always kind of iffy about cruises, but I went, I got the bug, and so for her future cruises, she would ask me to go, and I was very happy to join her. If it was only to support her, to be her aid, to help her with the things that she needed during the day. And you know, there would be times where, her condition really, with effort, any exertion just really exhausted her. Although it could be hard to tell when she was in the ship's casino, and that was definitely her happy place. Um, so with her illness, she would have what we termed flare ups, and sometimes that would require her to be hospitalized. So during the campaign, while I was running, sometimes I'd be going straight to meetings or campaign stops from her hospital room, or I would be leaving a meeting or a campaign event and going to her home to assist her with whatever she needed for the day. And so, it was just a lot of um, uh, effort, um, a lot of back and forth because I wanted to make sure that she was comfortable. And, we had family support, but, that was my grandmother. And I wanted to make sure that as this illness was progressing, she had all of the support that she needed. So, I would be back and forth between my home, her home, and all of the campaign stuff. And, she would put up a fuss and she would, um, you know, tell me, you need to go home or, tell me not to come before an event or after an event. But, it was my turn to take care of her. Like she stepped in to take care of me when I was a young child. So I was a candidate, somewhat campaign managing. I was helping to care for my progressively um, ailing grandmother. And then our family experienced an unexpected loss of my younger cousin who died suddenly, unexpectedly, and her name was Leah. And Leah and I were raised together in the same house, and we were like sisters. And I always considered her like a baby sister. And it was a difficult time, losing Leah. She was very young, had her whole life in front of her. She was my grandmother's niece, the daughter of my grandmother's sister, who you've heard me speak about on the podcast before, Aunt Beauty. So Aunt Beauty lost her daughter. She's caring for her sister. And then they also have a brother that, requires a bit of care. So, our family was just going through a lot. I was going through a lot. And it was a tough time. So, we lost Leah. And after, her memorial service, I actually had to leave the repast because I had a campaign event scheduled for the late afternoon. And, I didn't have to go, but it was important to me to go because I had previously, maybe 2 weeks earlier, had been in around those residents and were talking with them. And these were seniors, and they had some really quality of life concerns that needed attention. And so I forwarded those concerns to the appropriate parties, and I promised them that I would be back to follow up. And so I said, I'm going to keep my word. I'm going to go back. And I spent time with them. And, it was good to be there. I wanted them to know that I respect them. And I take what I'm asking them for, which is their vote, I take them and I take that very seriously, understanding the significance of that. So the election happened. As I said, I was not successful. The initial results showed that I was less than 20 votes shy of being elected. And the final certification came, and about a week and a half later, I was with my grandmother in bed, um, sharing comforting and loving words as she took her final breath. And 2025 was a year unlike any that I've ever experienced. And I just didn't have the capacity to do everything. And the one thing that I thought I could afford to let go for the time being was the podcast. And looking back, truthfully, I really don't know how I managed much of uh, much of it. It was a lot. You know, sometimes I can remember having when I had my children, and I had my children kind of back to back, and I was wife working a full-time job, and sometimes you think how do you fit it all in? And I always think love makes things possible. And I was fortunate to have support and to have, a certain drive or capacity that I have to say I learned it from my grandmother, just watching her operate, serving people as she did throughout her career. And so it was good to be able to support her. She encouraged me throughout the campaign. She wanted me to run. She was in support of that. But it was a lot. And so I was not able to keep up with the podcast. And there are a lot of lessons that I gained through that time that I'm still, coming to understand. And I'll be sharing those lessons in future episodes. But I'm so happy to be back. I'm happy to be back with the Nora Speaks audience, and just getting back to work and getting back to the principle of why this podcast began in the first place. But I'll say that in all transparency, there were several considerations that um, I had to really sit with before resuming the show. Am I emotionally ready? We are not, a year um, out from those losses. And, you know, am I ready emotionally? I mean, anyone who's experienced a loss, grief is something that, can, slam into you and really knock the wind out of you and have you unsteady for quite some time. But then, it also creeps up on you in certain moments, that are frankly unexpected. And so I'm dealing with that. And, lessons are coming, and I'm probably going to dedicate some episodes to talking about grief and what I've experienced through it. Some really interesting stuff, things that I didn't even uh, understand, or things I was never aware of. Um, some things I think interesting, so I'll be talking about that. So am I emotionally ready to resume the podcast? And do I have it in me to produce a weekly show? And is there anything that needs to change in this quote unquote relaunch of the podcast? And so, I took quite a bit of time, unpacking and thinking about, is it time for me to come back to the microphone? And in counsel with my team, I have a great supportive team. In counsel with them, and hearing their feedback too, you know, we agreed. I decided, yeah, it's time. Get busy and get back to work. And stumbles and slips come, as you go, and they'll come as I go, and I'll give myself grace and be okay with that. And I hope that the audience will be okay with that too. Nora Speaks is not a vanity project. Nora Speaks is not something that comes to entertain necessarily. It's not. You don't find gossip, celebrity news, sensational, salacious stuff. You're not going to find that here. What I strive to provide is constructive insights, conversations, guests, meaningful things, meaningful conversations to help us manage some of the issues that we need to work on in our community and things that we see and that should not be ignored. So this isn't a show to entertain necessarily. This is a show to uplift our community. And I believe that there continues to be a need and a space for Nora Speaks. And I hope that you think the same. So let me say I'm glad to be back on the microphone. I've missed this, speaking with the Nora Speaks audience and sharing positive and practical insight with my community. I want to thank everyone again who has supported me this past year. It has been a heavy one, but that's a life lived, right? And so I want to thank the listeners as well who've been listening or re-listening to past shows. I want to thank those of you who are here for the first time and listening to the podcast. And I hope that you'll be intrigued. I hope that you'll go back and listen to previous episodes to get an idea of what we do here on the podcast. And I pray that this is a great start to a relationship, because to me, the listeners of the podcast aren't just listeners. To me, you're a community. So I value you immensely. And so as I wrap up, I'll say, please come back to the show. Over the course of the next several episodes, I'll be sharing, some ideas and insights, takeaways that I got from the past year. And some of the things I'm grateful for. I think it's important to share gratitude. I think it's important to be thoughtful about gratitude and to share the things that you're grateful for. And often they can help mitigate grief and disappointment. And so I have a lot to be grateful for. So I'll be sharing some of that. But we're going to take it one episode at a time. But before I wrap up, I do want to share some important notes for you. The podcast, Nora Speaks, can be found on social media at Nora Speaks, at Nora Speaks. That's on X, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So yes, YouTube. This is new, that I'm going to be uploading episodes to YouTube. There's going to be clips of shows and things like that, but I'm also going to be uploading full shows, full recordings to YouTube. And so you can find that and subscribe on YouTube at Nora Speaks. And the last thing I want to share with you, those of you who have been with the podcast for a while, you've heard me talk about the Facebook page at Nora Speaks Podcast. Now, it's important that I let you know that Meta shut down my personal Facebook page in, I think it was December 2024. They removed my account because they said that I was with the copyright, infringing on copyright standards or community standards, something like that. Why? Because on my page, I posted clips of my podcast. Now, I don't understand it. I tried to appeal. They really didn't give me a means to communicate with anybody. So from my personal Facebook page, I had established a podcast page at Nora Speaks Podcast. Well, now I have no control over that page. It is still present. When they shut down my personal page, they didn't shut down the associating pages, which I don't quite understand that. So that page still exists. However, it will not receive any new updates from me on it. So if you would like to follow the podcast on Facebook, it's now at Nora Speaks, at Nora Speaks. No longer will Nora Speaks Podcast Facebook page receive any updates. There's still material from years ago that's still there. I don't quite understand how Meta could do this, would do this, why they would shut down my page. I own the material. It's called Nora Speaks. It was associated with me. I don't understand it, but that's not my platform to control, right? And so when we don't have full control, then we are at the mercy of those who do, right? We are at their mercy. We're at their beneficence. So remember, at Nora Speaks is where you can find the podcast on social media, X, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. I think that is it and all for now, folks. I want to thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you. all, and I look forward to being back with you with a new episode next week. Until then, stay in peace.
We were brought here as a piece of property, and to keep that piece of property, it is to not allow the property to know the value of the property. What I mean by that, if you had known the history of yourself, you would not have been made a slave. And you won't be a slave now if you have a knowledge of yourself. It's hard to enslave a person that have equal knowledge with you. You just can't do it. And so this knowledge of yourself is the thing that will free you from what you have been suffering from.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Nora Speaks. Look out for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, you can visit my website, noraspeaks.com. Or if you have a listener question, you can email me at nora@noraspeaks.com. Follow Nora Speaks on X, Instagram, and Facebook at Nora Speaks, or you can subscribe to the Nora Speaks YouTube channel. I will be sure to include links in the show notes. If Nora Speaks has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.